It's a deep drive down the right field line. That ball is gone! LSU wins the College World Series on a home run by Morris.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the 60 Feet, 6 Inches LSU podcast. As always, thank you for joining me. So in this episode, I will very briefly, recap the victory over Grambling State. But stay tuned as I am joined by two special guests to help me break down the Tennessee weekend series. I will also give you my 3 keys to the weekend for LSU, who makes the Get Right, Stay Right list, and then finally, my series prediction. As always, you can find the 60 Feet, 6 Inches LSU podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, and all the other major audio platforms. If you're viewing this on the YouTube channel, please make sure to subscribe, interact with me, hit me up with some comments as well. And then finally on Twitter, the account is at 60FT, 6IM LSU Pod. Make sure to subscribe to that account and hit that notifications bell as well. If you missed the last episode, I reviewed the Arkansas series as the Tigers took 2 out of 3. And as always, you can find that link on the Twitter account in both podcast and YouTube versions. So tonight, LSU beats Grambling State by a score of 17-5 to move to 22-3 on the year. Beloso and Jones both hit home runs on the night as the Tigers pound out 16 hits. In complete honesty, I didn't watch a lick of this game as I was getting ready for the podcast and doing the interview, which you will get to later. But as you would expect against a SWAC team, LSU takes care of business. Christian Little got the start tonight, which was good to see. Hopefully he was able to work out some kinks, and it looked like he did as he went 2 innings pitched, 1 hit and 4 Ks. Blake Money comes in. He gives up a 3-run home run. Then he's followed up by Duttons, Collins, and Bucknam to finish it off as LSU 10-run rules Grambling State. Moving on to the Tennessee series. As I told y'all, it was going to be very brief, but that's what you would expect. I don't think you're going to gain a lot from these games. Probably not going to learn a ton, but it looks like LSU got in a ton of reserves and subs and guys who haven't had a chance to play a lot lately. But when you look at the weekend series, obviously it's massive. Everybody has this thing circled. LSU comes into the series ranked number 1 in the country, while Tennessee is ranked number 11. Both teams got a victory on Tuesday night with Tennessee beating UNC Asheville. When you look at some of the team stats, LSU is first or second in almost every major hitting category in the SEC, while Tennessee is the exact opposite. When you look at the pitching stats, they are first or second in almost every major pitching category. In terms of your gold-plated money stat for the weekend, LSU and Tennessee, they are the top 2 teams in the SEC when it comes to getting the leadoff hitter on base in any inning. LSU is number 1, Tennessee is number 2. So in terms of being number 1, LSU gets the leadoff hitter on that's in any inning at a rate of 476. So 47.6% of the time, LSU gets the leadoff hitter on. And then Tennessee, 46.8% of the time. So it's going to be up to those pitching staffs to really decrease that number. As you can see, a lot of times early in games, Tennessee's giving up runs. LSU did the same against Arkansas as they fell behind in all 3 games. And then on the flip side, both teams score runs early in the game. So it's going to be very interesting to see who can jump out in front during the Thursday, Friday, Saturday series. Now, let's get into that interview. Hope y'all enjoy it as much as I did.
All right, guys, we have made it. We are one step closer to the SEC series that everybody circled when the schedule came out. It is time. Tennessee versus LSU at the box this weekend. Joining me to help me break down this absolutely monster college baseball series are 2 very special guests from the In Off the Bench podcast. They have had me on theirs before, so it's a pleasure to welcome them into the 60 Feet, 6 Inches LSU Pod. And they both have 2 very different rooting interests this weekend, Jim and Randy. So I'm going to be polite. I'm going to introduce the quote-unquote visitor first with Randy's going to be giving us insight from the Tennessee side. What's up, my man? How are you doing? Thanks for joining me, buddy.
Oh, absolutely, Chris. Appreciate you, man. Thanks for having us, man. I always listening to your podcast. Always love hearing the in-depth from a player's perspective, man. It's good stuff. So if you haven't listened yet, listen every week. Reviews, previews, all that.
No, I appreciate that, brother. And then obviously next up is a guy I had the pleasure to meet this weekend finally after going back and forth with him on Twitter and texting him and whatnot. And I tell you what, he was a gracious host, and he keeps some very VIP type people around him in his crowd. So I had a blast with Jim this weekend at LSU. He made me feel right at home with all of his friends. A true LSU fan through and through. Jim, what's up, buddy? How are you doing, my man? Thanks for joining us.
Man, I'm doing absolutely great. And Chris, my dad is from Louisiana, and he always taught me growing up, it's not what you know, but who you know, my brother. So I keep rolling with it.
There's no doubt. And I'm looking forward to seeing both of y'all this weekend. But look, before we get into it and we talk about Tennessee and LSU, I want y'all to tell everybody about y'all's podcast and where they can find all of your content before we get going here.
And Off the Bench podcast, it can be found on any streaming platform. It can be found on YouTube. The basis of our show, unlike Chris, we don't have that in-depth player now. We never stepped on that field, so we can't give the in-depth breakdown like that. But what we can do is we can interview the athletes who are on the field and let them share their story from growing up to what they're doing right now. Talk about their team, give us some insight about what's going on, give us a pulse, talk about the upcoming weekend, talk about the previous weekend, whatever it is. But we promote their brand, give them the shine that they're due. And, proudly, I'll say this, because this has been my favorite part. We're now at 48 NIL deals. So we just really try to take care of these athletes and give them their due. And specifically with college baseball, man, it's that hashtag grow the game. College baseball does not get the respect it's deserved. And so that's why it's been our main focus.
Yeah, no doubt. And I will tell everybody this. I will tag them and all the stuff on the Twitter account for this podcast, obviously, and on YouTube. But if you have not gotten a chance, and I'm going to repeat this at the very end, go follow these guys. They know the game. And more importantly, if you want to peek behind the curtain to see what these players are really like, to see how they got where they are, what their story is, Jim and Randy, and plus they have another guy that joins our podcast too with DB. These guys let their guard down and they just sit there and have a conversation with them. And it's not just baseball too, right? It's different college athletes with soccer or gymnasts, whoever it is. And it's really fun to see these guys just interact like you're just sitting across the kitchen table from them. So go check out the Off the Bench podcast. It'll be tagged everywhere, and I'll repeat that message again. But these guys do a great job of letting these college athletes get their stories out. All right, Tennessee versus LSU. As a reminder, this series starts on Thursday, so Thursday through Saturday. Tennessee's coming into the series at the time of this recording with an overall record of 19-6. They're 3-3 in the SEC after having just swept Texas A&M, while LSU at the time of this recording is 21-3 and 4-2 in the SEC. All right, so Randy, just give obviously, the target audience here, but just give everybody a quick synopsis of the Tennessee team and the season up to this point.
Yeah, I think that a lot of Tennessee fans, and it'll be said, the jokes will be made that there's a lot of new Tennessee fans, and I think that let's be honest about it, Chris, that's true for every fan base that has down years. You lose some fans and then you gain them back. But for every Tennessee fan that came into the season expecting a repeat of last year's action, it's just not realistic in the college baseball world. That team was special, something that you don't get to see every year. It's generational. That team is a foundation. But what this team has done so far, they're like you just said, 19-6, won again tonight against UNC Asheville. So for anybody, I think that you're looking at it from this hasn't been as good as we thought they would be because maybe they're not scoring as many runs, but there's so much good to look at. And if you just look back 4 or 5 years to when Tony Vitello got there, before he got there, if we were going to say we're 20-6 going into the LSU series, 500 in the SEC, there's not a Tennessee fan, a real Tennessee baseball fan that would not take that just 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, and Jim, from your perspective, obviously we look at it through a different lens, and all of us look at SEC baseball as a whole, but we focus on specific teams. Do you think, Jim, heading into this season, if I told you Tennessee heading into LSU weekend was 3-3, would you think that would be overachieving, underachieving from them point? How do you view their season through your lens?
I would have told you significantly underachieving, but that's because I was extremely high on them. As a matter of fact, because I did not want that number 1 ranking so bad, I put Tennessee at number 1 and LSU at number 2, even though Randy begged me to do it the opposite way. But I have high beliefs in them because me and Randy both value pitching over hitting. And what still is true to date is Tennessee's pitching staff is the best in the country, even with Tennessee's record. But if you would have told me that they had the amount of losses they had at this point, I wouldn't have believed you, especially with getting swept by Missouri.
Yeah, I think that was a big shock to me, the first SEC weekend. So let's get into that, Randy, in terms of you mentioned their lineup and what they did last year. And I remember doing the Tennessee preview because I did LSU and Tennessee together, save the best for last, right? The teams I had winning the West and the East respectively. And I followed Tennessee last year, but not to the extent that I probably do now, just seeing how they do. They had a monster year last year. But one thing I was looking at, so when you look at their lineup compared to last year, let me just throw some numbers out to you. And this was shocking to me. They lost 77% of their home run production last year, 79% of their RBI production. They hit 158 team home runs. There was no way I thought that they could replace that production. But where do you stand in terms of their lineup as of right now, heading into the LSU series?
I think that what they've done over the last couple of weeks, the Missouri series was obviously sobering for everybody. And as a former player that when you're going in, you're playing in 20 to 30 degree weather and the wind's blowing. There's no excuse. Missouri had to play in the same thing. But as far as the players go, what I think about the lineup is that Tony V's kind of been figuring things out. After the Missouri series, they came to that first midweek game. He pulled every starter not named Blake Burke and had those guys playing in like basically a pinch runner or pinch hit late in the game. He was sending a message, in my opinion, and I think they needed a wake-up call because what Tony Vitello came on our podcast and said was that each team, each year, has to find their own identity, and my next team will not be able to carry the weight of what the last team did, and the same for the year before that. So for me, what he's been able to do in finding some production from some guys that maybe we didn't hear of, like Kavaris has come in. He pulled a hammy the other day. But having Blake Burke is great. Having Christian Moore is great. Having Christian Scott, those guys is great. But you're right. You don't just replace Drew Gilbert. You don't just replace Jordan Beck. But I think that over the course of time, this team is not going to have maybe the pop and the flair. But I think the timely hitting has been there the last couple of weeks. In the A&M series, they were able to put up 7, 8, 9 runs a game. And I think that's what he was looking for. And he mentioned it. He said, look, when you get punched in the mouth in the SEC, you got to come back the next week and see if you have grit and resolve. And I saw that out of my team. So V was happy with the way it was. I was happy with where they looked. So I think they're fine. Yeah,
I watched some cut-ups of that A&M series. I watched some Missouri cut-ups, and I watched A&M. And a little worrisome if you're an LSU fan because you're like, man, they were really rolling. And y'all made A&M look pretty bad after they looked good in spurts against LSU. So, Jim, here are some Tennessee stats right now. They're hitting 297 as a team, 9th in the SEC. LSU's first in batting average. LSU's second in slugging, first in on base. By comparison, Tennessee's 5th in slugging, 8th in on base. It just doesn't seem like they're scoring a lot of runs. But, Jim, when you think about that lineup and maybe some specific guys that Randy mentioned, what do you think about the Vols coming in terms of a lineup perspective? Anybody stand out or really worry you when you think about the pitching staff going up against those guys?
Well, it'd only be right if I started with one of our guests. And I'm not going to start with the best name on the list yet. I'm going to start with a guy who got hot this past week, and that's Zane Denton, a.k.a. Zeus, that came from Bama. Yeah. We had him on actually as a Bama guest first, then Tennessee. This was a guy who was a projected first-team All-SEC. So you don't get that caliber projection unless they expect big things. He is now starting to turn it on for Tennessee. So he's a guy that I would be worrisome about because we know of his potential. Obviously you have a couple other big transfers in Maui Ahuna and obviously Merritt, but the guy who scares everybody, rightfully so, Blake Burke, the lefty, swings like Ken Griffey. It's
mama's baby.
And don't mess with his mom on Twitter. She'll come for you. But no, I'm looking, and a lot of these guys that I just mentioned right up top, like I said, Maui and Zane and Griffin, they're starting to come around, and that's the guys that Randy and me, when we did our initial breakdown, it was those transfer guys that we actually expected outside of Blake to do big production, and they're starting to come in, and maybe they just had to get acclimated, get a feel. As Randy said, each team builds their identity. It took a minute for that chemistry and everything to gel, even with the pitching staff that you had, even with the few guys that are coming back. And even tonight, a guy like Christian Scott, who we expected to be a starter, who has struggled, but he hit one out tonight, and then he had a diving catch, which is something we definitely expect from him. He's a guy who both ways, if he can start swinging it, he brings something to the table on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, Randy, anybody you wanted to add to the name of that list? I don't know if all the LSU fans listening to this podcast are intimately familiar with that lineup, and Jen dropped a bunch of names, but anybody else that we should be on the lookout for? Maybe guys that are getting hot.
I know where he's going right now. Jared Dickey. Go ahead and do it.
So Jared Dickey's a guy that he's just that dude, right? He's a guy he's a baseball guy, right? He's a guy that you can put in any position. Okay. He's a guy that's going to hit you in some big moments, and he's never scared of the moment. But a guy that really stands out to me that his name doesn't get called enough is Christian Moore. The guy's hitting 360 on the season. He's a plus defender. He's got extremely good range. plays second base for the Vols, sat out tonight, but he's a guy that all throughout, even the struggles against Missouri, he was still out there hitting the ball. So, you don't hit 360 in the SEC or on the season this deep in without being a really good hitter. He's got some pop, but more so he's a smart base runner. The one thing about Tennessee that's been really puzzling and concerning is the base running, but I don't have those worries with Christian Moore, and I think that's a name that not a lot of people hear.
Well, I will back you 100% on that because I watched all the cut-ups of the A&M series this weekend, and I felt like every time there was a rally, Christian Moore was intimately involved. It felt like that guy was on base literally every time they did a highlight or every inning. So LSU fans, you can expect Maui Ahuna, who is the Kansas transfer who starts at shortstop for Tennessee. He's going to lead off. Christian Moore, the guy we're talking about, plays second base, so he's the double play combination with Ahuna, and he hits second. And then you have Blake Burke, I think, the big guy, who is he's troubling. He's a big dude, and it looked like every ball he hits, even if it's just a pop-up, it feels like, because you've seen highlights of him hitting multiple bombs, it feels like it's going to go out. But I totally agree with you 100% about trying to keep Christian Moore at bay this weekend. All right, let's move on to that pitching staff. Just like y'all, I had them as the number one pitching staff in the SEC coming into the to the season and now into conference play. And there was no reason why you wouldn't rank them the number one pitching staff with all three of those starters returning. But Randy, just give the audience a little snapshot, if they're not intimately familiar with Dollander, Burns, and Beam, just kind of what these guys bring to the table and how they are a little bit different. And then, Jim, I'll have you follow up on that.
Yeah, starting out obviously with the Friday night or Thursday night guy in this series. This is the must-see TV matchup we've all been waiting for: Chase Dollander versus Paul Skenes. So for Chase Dollander, the transfer in from Georgia Southern, on the season, his numbers don't look as great as they did last year. He's 4-2, 3.93 ERA, but 53 Ks, 8 walks, and a 2.28 batting average against. The problem, I think, for Doe this year has been those first innings. So obviously something to watch out for against LSU is they want to get hot in the top of that lineup. But if he can manage those when it comes to the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth innings, he's still been one of the best pitchers in baseball. And just by watching him as a former pitcher, the guy's got the juice, he's got the stuff, and he can shut down any lineup. I don't care how good it is if his stuff is on. Chase Burns, I want to go to him for a second. 2-1, 4.15 ERA. So the ERA is a lot higher than it was last year. Way higher than he wants it to be, but this guy's got 59 Ks. If I'm not mistaken, that's the same amount Paul Skenes has. But 9 walks, 208 batting average against. So he hasn't been as dominant. He's given up more walks. He's given up more earned runs than I think he wants to. But just with the 59 Ks, he's still got the swing and miss stuff. We've talked to catchers who've lost sleep at night to catch this dude. And then you got QB1, man. To have a Sunday guy come in like Drew Beam coming in wearing the Sunday creams, 3-1, 2.54 ERA, only 27 Ks, 8 walks, 243 batting average against. And I say all that to say this: QB1 is, even last year when they were going through the SEC like they were, he's never the flashy guy, but he's the workhorse. He's the guy that's going to go out there and get you a solid, he didn't have his greatest stuff Sunday against A&M, but he was solid. He missed over the plate a couple times. He did not let that deter him, came back, went right after those guys again. So for me, it's a mindset thing with this staff, and to have guys like Burns and Beam that are, by the way, these guys are sophomores. Yeah. So the sky's the limit here with these guys. So I think that's as good of a starting rotation as there is in the country. And they got a little bit of ways to go, but I don't think that this early in the season I'm ready to say, they don't have it this year. I think that it's just early still.
Yeah. Jim, well, I think I want to correct Randy on that real quick. Now, I believe Skenes got 71 Ks to 36 innings pitched. So
70. That can't be real. That's video game numbers.
Yeah,
exactly. And you're going to find out Thursday night. So Jim, now look, I got a ton of respect for these guys, and in watching highlights, Dollander, all these guys throw mid to upper 90s, and Burns, I really didn't see a lot of him last year. He reminds me a lot of Garrett Edwards in the sense to where he's got a really, really hard slider that he throws a lot.
If you want to see a great Burns clip, Chris, I put it up. Jack Brannigan hits a 3-run home run in the Super Regionals to Notre Dame off Burns. It's a pretty great clip. No, I just did that. Throw shade at Randy. Burns, absolutely monster.
Yeah, so Jim, obviously you've seen LSU a ton. You pay just as close attention to anybody else. So when you look at the 3 starters LSU is going to roll out there, and LSU fans can relax because all 3 of Tennessee starters are right-handed. Wink, wink there. We don't have to hear the left-handed pitcher debate again. But, Jim, when you look at the staffs with Skenes, Floyd, your guy Floyd, and Hurd, and you look at Dollander, Beam, and Burns. How do you think those staffs kind of compare? How do they contrast? Obviously we know it's going to be great matchups.
So let's work in reverse order. I definitely think, to Randy's point, I think Beam has the advantage on Hurd. Drew Beam is a guy who would be definitely probably a Friday night starter for 99% of teams. So I definitely think they have that in their favor. But, Thatcher has proven himself. He obviously earned that spot. I have belief in him. But I would give them the nod on that one. Saturday, so yeah, Chase Burns has the more electric stuff. I would give him the nod as well. But I'm going to tell you, there was a reason why Ty Floyd was my guy, and he showed it to us this past weekend, Chris. The guy is a veteran in this league, and the way that he stuck in there through that first inning and then got better, as you said, and we talked about as the game went on. He's a guy that is very dependable and does not get shaken by the moment. He will not get shaken if Tennessee comes out and maybe gives him a pop in the mouth. So I really like him. And as Randy has said, Burns has came out and struggled, a little bit in the gate. So if that does happen, it could go both ways. But coming to Friday, okay. So coming in this season, I would have never said Skenes, even with all the hype, would be better than Chase or even put them on the same level. Yeah. I saw Skenes 4 times in scrimmages coming into the season. I've now seen him 3 times live in game. And I'll tell you something, there's got to be something to what Jay said about the level of the nutrition program, the weightlifting program, everything, because he is getting better and stronger, and it's scary. And for a Tennessee lineup that is trying to continue to improve, he is just not the guy that I think they're going to do it against. I think most people, as much as they want to see offense, I think they're not going to get much of it in that Thursday game. I think Doe loves this moment, and Randy talked about it on our show. He's going to get hyped for this. This is not going to intimidate him in a little bit, and so I expect a showdown. What I will say is, and I hate to give this nod, if any of these starters do buckle, I do believe Tennessee has the advantage when you talk about bullpen. I could rattle off the names, but I know you want to let Randy do the Tennessee thing, but they have some dudes.
That's a perfect segue, and you're exactly right, Randy. Let's talk about that bullpen, because one thing we talked about versus Arkansas is that we knew Hagen Smith was going to be in that flex role, but once he was used up on Friday, they had like 1 or 2 dudes, and that was really about it. But when I looked at what Tennessee lost and then looking at their stats, they have like 7 dudes in that pen, and all their stats are sick. Like they are below 2.5 ERAs, and they just run out like guys after guys after guys. So just give some of these LSU fans a primer on that pen, because it doesn't seem like there's a let up, and they got electric stuff as well.
Yeah, I mean, just some names just that pitched in the game tonight. You got Xander Zekrest. I think that if anybody's been paying attention, he's kind of been the midweek starter. That's a guy that could be, Jim said this before, he could be a Friday night starter on a lot of even SEC teams, probably not named Tennessee and LSU. Then you got Jacob Bimby. He's a big left-hander. You got Aaron Combs. He's also a big guy. A.J. Russell. Kirby Connell has been there for 117 years now. Yeah. He's got the coolest mustache in all of baseball. And it looks like every time he comes in the game, he just put a Bud Heavy down and had to put his cigarette out in the ashtray.
And I think he got – and let me cut you right there, Chris. I think he's the guy, because we talk about
he's a lefty
thing. Yeah, I think he's the guy that if it's tight down the stretch, I think he's the guy that they go to automatically.
Well, and not to mention, too, a name that a lot of people probably are familiar with is Ben Joyce. He was the volunteer fireman, hit 105 miles an hour. His twin brother, Zach Joyce, he's a right-hander, but he's playing. He doesn't get quite 105, but he can definitely touch 100. He's going to be coming in. Hollis Fanning. So you're talking about the bullpen numbers, and I think the last couple of games.
The 2 big – I can't believe Halverson or
Halverson. Those 2 guys.
I'm getting to those guys. But so what Halverson's going to be is he's the first line of defense. Like, if something happens to either end of those guys, Halverson's the one that's coming in. He's a righty, but he's going to come. You're talking about.
But I think he's like the Hagen Smith, like you said. Even though he's not a lefty, he's going to be that guy.
But what Jim talked about this about Doe not being scared of the moment. Halverson's a veteran dude. That guy's not going to be scared of the moment. He's been in the SEC. Spent last season out, with injury. Come back this season, and people forgot who that guy was. And he said it on our podcast. I'm going to remind him, and he has.
He's been
unhittable.
Chris, since you said you didn't get to watch last year, he was supposed to be the Sunday starter. Drew Beam, that was not his spot. And since he came into the season hurt, Drew walks in and then just says, okay, cool, my ball.
I'll be that guy. Yeah, no doubt. No, I mean, it's their pen is it's going to be interesting, just because there's no let up in that pen. And I know Vitello's not, like you said, we were talking and I looked, he ran like 6 dudes out there against A&M on Sunday, like just because, right? Like here, a third of an inning for you, a third of an inning for you. Just
did the same thing tonight.
Yeah. So,
and Drake Anderson, their pitching coach, is maybe one of the best, if not the best out there. So, I mean, that helps that you have a guy managing them extremely well.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right, we're going to start to wrap this sucker up here. All right, so Randy, then I'm going to come to you, Jim. So, Randy, from a Tennessee perspective, when you look at LSU, what concerns you about this weekend if things go a little sideways for the Vols?
I think the obvious answer is the offense, the lineup. I say it on Twitter all the time. It's 1 through 9. There's so much pop. And then even after 9, if you plug other guys in, there's still pop. And it's not just home runs because they're not, I think South Carolina leads the SEC in home runs, then Florida, even Tennessee's ahead of LSU. So it's not really the home runs that really concern me. It's that they just mash the ball. They have a way of exploding. It can be nothing for 5 innings, and all of a sudden they got an 8 spot up, and before you even know what's going on. And when you have the best player in baseball, and I'm not even going to say college baseball because I'm not convinced he's not the best player that plays baseball right now, and Dylan Cruz. And then you got guys like Tommy Tanks and the Creole Bambino, Trey Morgan. There's no bigger fan, unless you're an LSU fan, of Trey Morgan than me. I will ride till I die with that dude. I wish he would wear orange. But anyway. The whole thing, man, the lineup and then Paul Skenes, I'll be honest with you, and this is no disrespect to LSU's pitching staff. Outside of Paul Skenes, I don't have a whole lot of fear that the pitching is going to be what shuts that lineup down. What I fear is that the lineup is so good that you could get through 2 or 3 guys, and then all of a sudden the 8-9 hole, they're hitting doubles and triples off the wall. That's what worries me.
I got you. Jim, from the LSU perspective, what worries you about Tennessee this weekend? What are some of your concerns?
Nothing. No. I honestly, before I do that, I got to talk about what he talked about. Being that we've been at these games and I've seen it, like I watched it starting with Stanford, who isn't some amazing team, but they actually, I texted Randy in real time and I said, dude, they are going to walk Cruz with the bases loaded and get to Tommy White. He goes, I would too. And then Tommy hits the grand slam. Well, fast forward to Arkansas, that scenario happened again. And Tommy White hit a grand slam again. And, I mean, it's just – you can't duck Trey Morgan. You can't duck Dylan Cruz. You can't duck Tommy White. And now I think Cade Beloso, I'm playing him. I was one of those who was not a big advocate of putting Trey Morgan in left field, but I'm all about having Jared Jones and Cade Beloso in the lineup. So, and I don't know if you're even aware, Chris, it really wasn't put out there. I got to talk to him in the parking lot post game. So I'm breaking news for people who didn't know that Paxton Kling is actually dealing with a back issue.
Yeah, that came out.
They weren't really, but that series, people thought he was just actually sitting because he was slumping. He was actually sitting because he was hurt.
Right.
But what fears me? But if you want to know, it's probably the bullpen outside of Garrett Edwards. Garrett Edwards has been absolutely electric. As far as Kristen Little's last 2 outings have been shaky. Cooper, I believe the last 2. I know the last one for sure. Have been shaky, and so it scares me that our bullpen hasn't been stable coming into this series. So if they do knock out one of our starters, let Garrett Edwards fly, pitch all 3 nights. Let's go,
Chris. I got a question for you.
Yeah, man.
What's to say? We haven't seen this yet. What is going to happen if Paul Skenes gets hit around? Because every pitcher gets hit around.
It's going to happen. I was telling my son that this past weekend. So it's, coming into SEC play, I was wondering how dominant he was going to be versus obviously more talented hitters. The lineups are deeper. And then I saw him do that against A&M. And then I was really interested to see how he did against Arkansas. And then this is another test for him. And then when they go to South Carolina, it's another test, right? It just doesn't let up. He's going to get hit at some point. Like he's going to give up a 4 spot in 3 innings. Something's going to happen. Burke's going to get the head out. He's going to catch one and send one on to over the right field wall, or an error, a double, a walk. Something's going to happen. And then honestly, they'll probably let him ride for as long as they can.
If they don't, is it Shores or Herring? Who you got coming in?
Well,
if it's early, I'm thinking it's Shores, right? It's got to be this guy who's been.
I would imagine
starts.
it's Shores, yeah, and they'll save Edwards for Saturday, Sunday. I think you're exactly right, Jim. That's a great name to pull out the hat right there. It's probably going to be Chase Shores. Yeah, I think you're
Another
exactly
guy who's
right.
touching 100, by the way. So
what you won't see, we didn't mention this. We kind of talked about this on our show. Arkansas went all in to win that Friday night game. You won't see Tennessee do that. You won't see them go all in to win a game because they don't have to do that with their pen. I think Arkansas has a lot of talented arms. They have a lot of injuries. Tennessee's bullpen is strong. They're deep. So if their starters do get in trouble, Tony V will have no problem going to the pen.
And let me say that in regards to one game. Another thing, if you look at where Tennessee has put themselves, obviously with that Missouri series, and if you look at their upcoming schedule, Tennessee really needs this series. So they don't want one game. They want two. They obviously want all three, but they're not looking to come down here with anything less than two. So they definitely ain't going for one.
Yeah, I'm looking at their schedule. They got Florida, Arkansas, and Vandy coming up. So it's
Are those teams good?
Yeah, they're not bad. They're not bad.
I'm not convinced about Vanderbilt. I don't care what you say.
They're all top 10 teams. That's all I can tell you.
No, they're really good.
Another concern too is if all three of those guys, especially the first two with Dollander and Burns, if they shut out LSU for 6 or 7, and I'm not going to ruin what I'm going to say on my podcast coming up after this interview, but that's a concern of mine. Whereas if they throw up a bunch of zeros and they get rolling, and they just lean into that environment because they've been there. They're dudes. They're going to get fired up too. If they just lean into that environment and they catch a little momentum, and all of a sudden it's in the 7th and LSU's down 2 or 3-0, could be an issue. I mean, that's kind of one of my biggest concerns is can you get it going enough against these guys?
But how many games this year have you seen where LSU has struggled for an X amount of innings, and then next thing you know, they put up a double-digit spot?
No, you're right. You're right. And I'm just saying, like, if I'm being honest, that's a concern. Like, it hasn't necessarily happened, but I mean, when you're facing guys like this, that it's just
a different animal.
That's what I'm saying. So I think you got to put some respect on them. All right, real quick, let's get a prediction here. All right, Randy, you got to go first here. Prediction on the series.
I'm gonna say that Tennessee takes 2. I think they're gonna Thursday night they're gonna win because I'm gonna be there. And I'm going to say that LSU comes back and wins game. They're going to win Friday. It's going to go all in. It's going to be a bullpen game. And I like Tennessee's chances when it comes to a bullpen game taking the series.
All right. Jim, what's your thoughts? What you got?
I'm sticking with what I told you last night, Randy. I'm coming hard. All I've heard about is how y'all have won the last 6 games. None of those were at Alex Box. And so give me the sweep.
There we go. That's what I like to see. Listen, guys, I cannot thank y'all enough for your time. Both of you for jumping on and joining me. I can't wait to see both of y'all at the box this weekend. Everybody, please look, go follow Jim on Twitter, go follow Randy on Twitter, go definitely check out the In Off the Bench podcast. Everything will be tagged on my Twitter account, linking this to the YouTube channel and podcast form as well. I can't thank these guys enough. And with that being said, y'all stay tuned for my prediction as well.
Okay, I hope y'all had a really good time listening to Randy from the Tennessee perspective and obviously Jim from the LSU perspective. Both those guys will be at the series this weekend, as will several other people. Alex Day from the Weekend Rotation podcast will be there, but he was at the Arkansas series as well, so it was very cool to hang out with Alex. I know the guys, Matt Beard and his buddies from the Spittin' Seeds 247 account on Twitter will be down there as well. So just a massive contingent of people from the Tennessee and LSU side. A lot of good podcast guys, a lot of guys that follows a ton of college baseball will be in attendance to watch that series. So what are my 3 keys to the weekend for the Tigers? The first thing, they cannot let whatever they are doing in that other dugout and whatever the crap that Tony Vitello and those guys are doing, whatever gimmicks they are pulling, whatever trash they are talking, they cannot let that stuff affect their play. They cannot get drawn to any type of those head games. But trust me, Tennessee is going to be up for this series. I'm sure they're going to be hooting and hollering, have a ton of adrenaline flowing. And LSU just can't get pulled into that dugout. They need to focus on what their job is and just don't mess with any of those antics. I'm sure Vitello is going to blow up this weekend. Hell, he may even get injected. You just can't focus on what those jokers are doing, fur coats, canes, any of that junk. Just go out there and handle your business. The second key, I think LSU is going to have to win 1, if not 2 games and come from behind fashion. And I'm talking late in the game, really in the 7th, 8th, and 9th. And I can't really recall LSU having to do that a lot this year off the top of my head. I'm sure there's been one or two instances, but I think some of these games are really going to go down to the wire. You know that Dollander, Burns, and Beam, even though they may have a little bit higher ERAs than you would expect at this time of year, they've given up a few more runs. They still strike out a ton of hitters. They don't really walk anyone. Their walk numbers are very impressive compared to their innings pitched. And look, they are proven elite SEC arms. Luckily, they're all right-handed pitchers. They got some lefties in the bullpen, but none of their starters are left-handed. But their bullpen has some serious dudes down there. They're not like Arkansas where they're very thin in the pen. Kentucky has really 5 to probably 7 guys that they can run out and be very effective. The third key to the weekend, and it seems like this has happened almost every weekend, really, in some form or fashion. But I think the bullpen's going to have to step up again. You're definitely going to need Little, Cooper. Hopefully Ackenhausen's feeling okay from that little bit of an injury he had during the Arkansas series. And then you've seen the emergence of freshman pitchers, right-handed pitcher Chase Shores, and then left-handed pitcher Griffin Herring. They threw great last weekend. They're really starting to build successful SEC outings as they continue to gain experience, being only freshmen in this conference. But mark down Garrett Edwards. He's going to have some type of say in this series, and he's been consistent as all get out, but they're going to need some other help in that bullpen. Shores, Herring, Cooper, Little are going to have to get some key outs, I think, whenever the starters do exit those games. So those are the 3 keys. Focus on your dugout, have a come-from-behind win or 2, and then the bullpen's going to have to step up again. Okay, who's going to make the get right, stay right list? It's a list a little bit longer than it typically is. And remember, I try to pick different guys every weekend. First of all, get right, Christian Little. I know he started tonight against Grambling State. Looks like he did what he was supposed to do. 2 innings pitched, 4 Ks. But he's really had back-to-back subpar performances when you look at his outings against A&M and then Arkansas in the SEC. Hopefully he's worked out any issues that may be bothering him. Look, I don't think he has a lack of confidence. I don't have a lack of confidence in him. I think he's going to be massive in this pen moving forward for the Tigers. And I just love his mentality and his attitude. In the bullpen, I think you have to have an attack mindset. You can't shy away from the situation because they're going to throw you in the fire, expect you to limit the damage, expect you to get out of jams, put up zeros at the end of the game when it's tougher than any other part of the game. And I want to see Christian Little get right this weekend. Also, Jared Jones. He hit a home run against Grambling State. And I'm not sure how much we'll see Jared Jones this weekend. I do think you're going to see him because I think you're going to see more of Cade Beloso than we've seen previously. But Jared Jones facing all right-handed pitching. You know, does he play first base? Does he DH? But Jared Jones, we need you to get right. He's still hitting .333 at the time of this recording on the year with 8 home runs. He does have 14 walks and 32 Ks, and those 32 strikeouts do lead the team. But Jones, in his last 7 games before the Grambling State game, he was only 6 out of his last 23, which is .261 with 6 walks and 12 Ks. So Jared Bear Jones, baby, we're going to need you to get right this weekend against the Vols. Then finally on the get right list, Thatcher Hurd. He was on the list last weekend. It was a miss for me. He had another inconsistent outing versus Arkansas. And to me, I think it's just the walks that are kind of causing some issues. And I think the reason for those walks is he really hasn't had 2 pitches working at the same time in a couple of different weeks. Look, he's not like Paul Skenes where he can go out there and blow 98 past people. He's going to throw 92 to 95. He's got a great changeup and a great slider. It just doesn't seem like his slider's been in the zone the last 2 weekends. And I think he really needs that pitch almost more than the others to be very successful. So I look for Thatcher Hurd to bounce back. Yes, I would keep him in the Sunday spot. I do think they're going to keep him in the Sunday spot. They need him to be successful, backing up Skenes and Floyd. I would love to see Thatcher Hurd turn that around against the Vols and then finally get right this weekend. So who's on the stay right list for the Tigers? To me, I think it's all about the veterans. And this isn't going to be any type of surprise. They have some of the best players in the country on this team, and they need to lead from the front now. I think they're going to have to play well for the entire weekend for LSU to win the series. And really, there's not a whole lot I can say about these 3 guys. But looking at Skenes and Cruz, that's 2 national players of the week. I think they're going to have to lead from the front. In terms of Skenes, look, just continue to be the man. Be him. Be that dude on a Friday night. Again, well, it's Thursday night this weekend. So for Skenes, just be yourself. You don't have to do anything more or anything less that you've been doing. Be the guy who is 5-0 with a 0.72 ERA, who has struck out 71 batters in only 37 and a third innings pitched. Be the best pitcher in the country, just like you have been all year. Just do that again on Thursday night versus Chase Dollander. That is going to be appointment viewing, an amazing matchup on Thursday night for the whole country to tune in and see. Also, stay right. Dylan Cruz, baby. You lead the country in batting average at .531. He's going to be consistent in some form, whether it's extending at bats, hitting with 2 strikes, drawing walks to set up Tommy Tanks, hitting cruise missiles, driving in runs. Cruz will affect the game somehow, and he's always going to have an effect, but you need it for all 3 games this weekend. And I don't care what it is. I don't care if he draws a 2-out walk and then steals a base and then Tanks hits a single. But Dylan Cruz continued to be the best player in the country. Tommy Tanks, he had a bad Friday last weekend against the 2 lefties for Arkansas. He redeemed himself in a big way on Saturday. I think Tennessee, I don't think their pitchers are going to back down. I think they will attack Cruz when they can. Remember, they have above average stuff. All these guys throw mid to upper 90s. But I wouldn't be surprised if they force Tommy Tanks to beat them. And Tennessee may say, all right, we know you're having a great year, but prove to us, prove to these arms that you can beat us and help Dylan Cruz take some of that burden off of his shoulders. So I look for Tanks to stay right this weekend. He doesn't have to prove himself to anybody. He's already been great. He doesn't have to be more than he already is. Swing harder, hit the balls harder, right? Be more aggressive than he has been. Just stay Tommy Tanks, and I think everything's going to turn all right for the weekend for the Tigers. And then finally, in terms of the stay right list, I'm putting Garrett Edwards, the unsung hero of the pitching staff, the most consistent guy we have in the bullpen this year, the fireman I've been calling him. We need Garrett Edwards to stay right this weekend. And he's going to be called on in probably a big way, and he's probably going to have to extend at some point against the Vols. The last 2 weekends versus A&M in Arkansas, Garrett Edwards, 8 innings pitched, 5 hits, only 4 walks, and 13 Ks. So Garrett Edwards, stay right, baby. So just to go over it once again, get right. Little, Jared Jones, Hurd, stay right. All the leaders, Skenes, Cruz, Tanks, and in that bullpen, Garrett Edwards. All right. We heard those guys' series predictions. You got Jeezy going 2 out of 3. You got Big Jim going for the sweep. So what do I feel like here on the 60 feet, 6 inches LSU pod? What is my prediction for the series? And I've circled this. I couldn't wait to see this series. When the schedule came out, you saw Arkansas and Tennessee. And from an LSU fan's perspective, those are 2 great series to attend in person. 2 potential, obviously counting LSU, actually 3 potential Omaha teams when you look at those teams right there. But in terms of a marquee matchup, it doesn't get any better when you're talking about the sport of college baseball. So I'm predicting a sweep for the Tigers, baby. That's right. I'm going out on a little bit of a limb. I've gone kind of conservative, 2 out of 3 the past 2 weekends. But we know if you win 2 out of 3 in the SEC and you go 20-10, I will take that record right now. But this weekend, I felt it coming out of the box last weekend. I thought about it Sunday and then again on Monday. I just feel like a sweep is going to happen. So if I catch hell on Twitter or in my mentions or I'm bad luck, whoever wants to call me that, I don't care. I'm riding with my Tigers this weekend versus the Vols. So I can't wait for the box. I'm going to be there. It's going to be loud. It's going to be rowdy. Hopefully we see some of the Alec Box magic, the rally possum, whatever it is. I don't care. A national audience is going to be tuned in. You know, all the major college baseball writers are going to be there, and it's going to be electric. There's going to be a ton of hatred and venom spewed at Tennessee and their coaching staff. And this is what college baseball and competition is all about. But I'm predicting LSU to sweep. On another side note, this is kind of I added this late to my notes. I think Cade Beloso could play a massive role for LSU this weekend. You know, Jay Johnson's talked about him getting more at-bats. He hits another home run against Grambling State. So I look for Beloso, especially against those right-handed starters, whether he plays first or DHs. Creole Bambino, I would love to see him kind of assert himself as a senior leader this weekend versus the Vols. So that's going to do it for this week's brief review of the LSU Grambling State game, and then the preview of the Tennessee series this weekend. I want to thank Jim and Randy from the In Off the Bench podcast for joining me and helping me preview the Tennessee series. Look, guys, if you don't follow them on Twitter or you haven't found their podcast yet, it is a great podcast, and I will tag their accounts on my Twitter account whenever I post links to this podcast. They do a great job of putting out a bunch of content, but really good content as they take a look behind the scenes and they get these athletes, whether it's baseball, softball, soccer, from different SEC schools and different schools around the country. You know, LSU, Ole Miss, Arkansas, Mississippi State, Tennessee, Wake Forest, Stanford, whoever it may be. They reach out to these kids. They get them to let their guard down. They figure out what their backstory is. How did they end up at their school they're at? And obviously they help them promote their brands with NIL. They even help them get NIL deals. And I think the In Off the Bench podcast, those guys do a great job. And it's really just something different than I offer here at 60 feet, 6 inches. So please go check that stuff out. And look, these guys watch a ton of college baseball. They're not just fans. They don't just pull for their school. They have a lot of great relationships with these kids. They get a lot of kind of inside information. They know their parents very well, and they just become friends with these kids over time. And they just do a really good job over there. And these guys are two very cool guys, and I've had the pleasure to meet them and can't wait to hang out with them this weekend at the box. So thank y'all for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel as always. Follow me on the Twitter account. Interact with me as there's going to be some crazy stuff going on at the box, and I'll be live tweeting as always. Don't forget, check out the podcast on all the major audio platforms. Next up, the Tennessee Review podcast. So no travel plans this weekend for me. Plus, there's Sunday off. So the goal is to try to go live with an instant analysis late Sunday afternoon in that 5:30 time frame, which you feel like works out best. But stay tuned to the Twitter account for additional details, as we hope to stream that live on the YouTube channel and Twitter as well. Don't forget, I'm also trying to put out some more content on YouTube with shorts. So I'm going to try to stay consistent with that. So if you have a chance, check those out. But until next time, let's go Tigers. Let's get that sweep. Y'all stay safe. And as always, go Tigers.